Hi there, welcome to Helius's Solana Frontend Developer course. In today's video, we're going to build a transaction viewer that allows you to review your transaction history for any Solana wallet you connect to the app. My name is Nathan Galindo. I'm a developer experience engineer at Helius. I'm based in Texas and I'm a full stack Solana developer. So please feel free to reach out to me on X to ask me any questions about Solana, Helius, or this course. In today's video, we're going to have an overview of the project we're going to build. We're going to build out the code together, and then we're going to clean our code by refactoring the components we build. All right, let's get started with today's project. So if you haven't been following along with this video series, or maybe you just don't have a Solana development environment set up, please reference video 2 of this series where I show you how to download all the software and all the dependencies you need to follow along with this course and build out the project we're going to build out in this video. Assuming you have all of that already, I'm going to go ahead and move forward with this project. But again, please, if you're new to Solana or you just don't have the tools yet, go ahead and reference video number 2 where I show you how to download everything you need for this project and for this entire course. So please go ahead and navigate to project number 8, transaction viewer, and click preview. Of course, you're going to want to be running the repository in your local browser. I'm running a mine on localhost port 3000. And then you can go ahead and navigate to pages, and then go ahead and navigate to viewer, and then drag out the finished and the starter files side by side. So simply put, this app is going to be a transaction viewer. It's actually pretty straightforward, and the business logic in this app isn't actually complicated at all. It's actually, I think, one of the more simpler projects we've built in terms of business logic, because we are actually using Helius APIs to query the transaction history of our wallets. And that's why Helius APIs exist, right? These kind of tooling, that's why this kind of tooling exists, to make our lives as developers as easy as possible. And so, the business logic is pretty simple. What I really want to do with this project is exercise your front-end skills, because I realize a lot of you using this course or going through this course aren't just new to Solana development, but new to front-end development altogether. And so I wanted to build out this final project to really exercise your React skills and show you how we can refactor our code together to make composable, well-designed React applications. This is just an example, and I'm not saying that it's a perfect example, but I think you'll be able to take key things away from this lesson that you'll be able to use as you build out your own projects. So enough yapping. This is the app. Again, very simple. We're just going to go ahead and connect our wallet. Now, it actually it shouldn't matter. I believe it shouldn't matter whether you're connected to the front end or the back end. So what you can do is you can just press call transaction and wait a little bit. As simple as that. It's going to query the transaction history. And if you want to look at, any one of the transactions that you queried, you can just go ahead and click on that, and it'll display a pop-up view, and where you can scroll through your transactions values, essentially. We can go ahead and close that. We can open this one, et cetera, et cetera. That's basically how it works. Pretty simple application. And let's go ahead and get started building it out together. Let's go ahead and navigate to the starter file in our viewer project. And you should see some boilerplate like that. In your code, go ahead and remove that boilerplate per usual. Open up some curly brackets and then a return statement. And you can go ahead and get rid of that dependency. So essentially, let's just go ahead and bring in the dependencies we need for this project. So of course, we're going to need React, and these are actually 2 new dependencies if you've been following along with this course, we haven't used these. These are from a library called Helius UI. I believe it's made by the same people who made Tailwind CSS. And it's essentially a library of functions that help you create really clean kind of UI transitions and animations without too much hassle at all. Actually, I think it's definitely one of my favorite libraries for UI animations. And by animations, I mean like very, very simple animations. Nothing super complex or, out of this world. Okay, awesome. So next, you'll see that I have my Helius API key right there. Now I'm on the free plan, right? So, I mean, you could steal my API key, but I'm on the free plan. I mean, you're not gonna ruin my life. I only have it here for just demonstration purposes. I do not recommend, now this is not how you build production code, okay? You never want to hard code your API key in your file. Someone's gonna steal it from GitHub. It's a horrible idea. What you want to do in production is something like this, where you would create a environment variable in your .env file, and then you would essentially, you can paste in the whole URL, or you can just paste in the API key like this. And let me just do this for demonstration purposes. And so that way, we'd essentially be able to use our API key throughout our code by declaring, if I can find where I even declare the code, it would just be next public API key, like that essentially. And I believe, yeah, it would essentially look something like that. You could import those environment variables throughout your code, so that way you're not really exposing them, but you're still able to use them in production. But for simplicity's sake and for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to have my API key up here. I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of that. Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and copy and paste my API key. Now I recommend you do not copy and paste my API key because you wouldn't be the only person to do that. What I want you to do actually is go to the Helius website, go ahead and get started for free, and you can just connect your Solana wallet. And then after you do that and you're on the developer dashboard, it should look something like this. You can just go ahead and go to API keys and copy, and you would just paste your API key where I have mine essentially. And so once you do that, we're gonna go ahead and declare our React state variables. So React is a stateful application, and we can declare pieces of state that we want to update throughout the lifetime of our app, right? And so these are the kind of state variables that we're going to update as the user uses our app essentially. And so we're going to start off with declaring a state variable called parse history URL. And we're going to set that to set parse history URL. Essentially, we're declaring the variable on the left, and then the React function on the right in green that's responsible for updating this purple variable's state essentially. So that's kind of how that works. And we use the use state React hook in order to do that. So we're declaring a new one called list of transactions. And this is actually, I'm going to use the any and set that to an empty array. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and acknowledge it right now before y'all start calling me a charlatan in the comments. We're using TypeScript to build this app, and it's not best practice to use this any type declaration, just because it kind of throws all type safety out the window. I did that for demonstration purposes and just so that we kind of can focus more on really the core of the application and we don't waste too much time, digging through, finding out the specific structure of this response object, because it's not the core lesson that I'm trying to teach here. But I do challenge you to actually maybe even pause this video when we get there and take the time to declare the type of the transaction object we get back from the API call. So just want to stop there and acknowledge it. Let's go ahead and continue. So this React variable is going to be a Boolean value, and we're actually going to use this to kind of toggle the display status of that kind of modal that we would see on screen whenever we click the transaction. You would have seen this when I showed you how our app works earlier in this video. And finally, this is just going to be an object that holds the transaction details of a specific transaction we want to query, essentially, that we want to look at. Okay, fantastic. So now we're going to grab some values from the wallet that's connected to our app. If you've been following along with this course, you've pretty much seen these two lines of code in literally every single project we've done. The wallet adapter React library is just super clutch and makes our life so much easier when interacting with our wallet. Okay, awesome. So we did that. Now the next thing we have in our code is the function to actually retrieve the transaction history of our wallets, I believe. And then we have this function to retrieve this specific transaction we want to view, right? So when we clicked on the transactions as they were already loaded on our UI earlier, that's the function that handles that. But before we do that, we're actually going to use the useEffect hook from the React library. So React useEffect, and we've used this hook quite a few times throughout this video series. We're going to pass in the connection and public key values into an array like that. And then we're going to use our set parse history URL function here. And we're just going to pass it. I can open that up real quick. We're going to pass it this URL string and using string interpolation. So what we want to do is use backticks. And I just copy and pasted that just for simplicity's sake. I'm not going to blame you for doing the same, but I do recommend that you hand type out as much as you can as you follow along with this lesson, because if you're new to Solana development, that is going to help you learn. And so, yeah, please take my advice on that. But essentially, let's ask ourselves, what is this URL? What are we doing here? Essentially, we're setting the endpoints for our API call that we're going to make, right? So this way, whenever the wallet that's connected to our app changes, so whenever this connection or this public key changes, we're going to update this URL string and feed it the appropriate public key. So, the new public key that's connected to our account and the given API key that we have, right? Simple as that. I mean, really, we could hard code this API key inside this API URL, since this shouldn't really be changing, but, at least this way you get a little bit more practice inserting values programmatically into strings. So yeah, let's just say that's all on purpose. Okay, awesome. Yeah, let's go ahead and comment that. So auto updates URL endpoints with connected wallet. Okay, awesome. So then let's go ahead and pay attention to kind of the meat. Like this block of code here, this function is really what makes our app work whatsoever. So let's go ahead and get started with that. I'm going to call this parse transaction history. It's going to be an asynchronous function. It's going to take this event property, and we've done this, I think, in pretty much every single project so far, but we're using this event argument to prevent our React app from reloading whenever this function is executed, right? So when I click that call transactions button earlier, if it weren't for this little line of code, our whole, app would have reloaded, and it just makes kind of for a quirky user experience if you do that. And so, in the name of providing the user with a pretty seamless and enjoyable user experience, it's important to pay attention to details like that and know how to address them. You don't always want to use this line of code, but there are times when you do, and that's how you do it. It's pretty simple. Okay, so here's where we call it the API. So we're gonna initialize a constant variable called response, use the await keyword, use the fetch function, and we're just gonna pass in our API like that. It's very simple. And essentially what this does is this updates this state variable with this value, our URL endpoint, and then we're gonna pass this value into this fetch function to make our API call. Very, very simple. And assuming that works, we're going to format that response object format the response into a JSON object and store that into a variable called data. And then we're going to set our list of transactions state variable with this value essentially. And then for development purposes, we can just log to the console parsed transaction history. Now, if you're building a production app, maybe depending on what kind of app it is and depending the kind of information you're trying to log to the console, you want to be mindful of the data and the kind of messages you log to the console as well. That also contributes to the user experience. Okay, awesome. Let's go ahead and just let's fill out that detail. Let's go ahead and fill out this other function. We don't really have to do this right now, but might as well just get it taken care of. Handle transaction details. It's going to take a signature, just a string value, and we're using ES6 syntax, so go ahead and write your arrow function like so. And then we're going to instantiate a new variable called transaction, and we're going to grab that list of transactions that we just initialized up in this parse transaction history function. And we're going to say we want to find, so this function again is called when you click on a specific transaction that you want to review, right? So we're going to use the find method, and we're going to say for each transaction, let's check if the transaction signature is equal to the signature that we're passing into this function. Simple enough. And then we're going to set transaction details with that transaction and set display details as true. That's going to make our modal, pop up. Now with actually better practice, if we say if transaction, so if that even exists, then we will execute those instructions. Else, we can just say toast error transaction does not exist, and then we can just return. Okay, so that's actually a better way of doing it. Yeah, awesome. So just like that, that's pretty much all of our business logic done. Like I said, the business logic in this app isn't, the focus. I wanted to give you the chance of using Helius APIs just to, I guess, get a sense of like how simple it makes, your code, right? I mean, like, think about it. We literally, the functionality to call the entire transaction history of your Solana wallet is really in just one line of code. That's it, one line of code. It's actually pretty amazing. So shout out to the Helius team for making that possible. So what we're going to do now, and pretty much for the majority of this demo, is we're going to build out the UI. we're going to actually be building out two UI components. So the main one in our starter functional component, and then we're going to build a new one called transaction details. And I did not refactor it you should not have transaction details refactored as it is, because I wanted to save that so that we could do it together, essentially. And so, don't be confused. Sorry for stuttering so much. Let's just go ahead and get into the code. Okay, so go ahead and erase those React fragments and just type out some main HTML tags like so. I'm gonna go ahead and make this bigger. And let's just go ahead and type out that Tailwind CSS. And right now, if you're new to Tailwind CSS, we are kind of defining the width parameters of this UI components, saying, how much width on screen it takes, given the size of the screen. Okay, so this transaction details component, I want you to ignore that for now. Don't copy that, but go ahead and leave a comment saying just transaction details components, and we'll get back to that in just a moment. But first, we're going to focus on the current component we're building. So we're going to create a form object. You should be familiar with forms because we've used them quite a bit throughout this app. And I want you to include the class name property and the onSubmit property for this form. The onSubmit property, we're going to use an arrow function to call the parse transaction history function we created earlier. I'm going to pass that event property. And for the styling of this form, let's go ahead and give it some rounded corners. We're going to set its height to the contents that the form contains. We're going to go ahead and give it a custom background property, give it some padding, and define. Oops. Am I doing that right? Yep. And define its width given various screen sizes. Okay. So just like that, we've created our form. Now within our form, we have this div, and this is essentially going to be our header. So if you actually want to write out comments to understand your code more, you can do so like that. And we're going to give this some styling. So flex, justify, between, items, center. And essentially, we're going to have two elements inside of this div, the title and the button we use to execute our function or submit this form. And then, per usual, I'm just going to go ahead and copy the button CSS. The reason why the button CSS string is so long is because we have, I can go ahead and explain it just to touch on it. We have these conditional CSS properties like hover or disabled that essentially say, if the state of this button is on hover, then we're going to render this CSS, right? Or if it's disabled, then we're going to apply this CSS property, essentially. So there's a really great utilities on CSS. It's just such a clean, concise way of, doing conditional CSS, or providing conditional CSS properties on your HTML items. But I just didn't want to type out that long string. I wanted to kind of focus on the other parts of our app, especially this kind of scary looking part if you're new to React whatsoever. So what are we doing here? Well, let's go ahead and open up some curly brackets. And essentially, opening up curly brackets within our UI component is going to allow us to insert, logic essentially for conditional rendering of a UI component essentially. So let's go ahead and do that. What we're saying here is if the length of this list of transactions state variable that we populated with the data we fetched from our API call. So if that's longer, if the length of that array is longer than 0, so we're saying if it's populated with any kind of data whatsoever, then we are going to render, and you can actually open up a pair of parentheses like that. It's a little bit of a cleaner way of doing it. We're going to render a div. And let's go ahead and give this div name some CSS. We're going to give it a custom background color like so. Some border information. And we're going to give it some rounded corners, some padding. Fantastic. And within that div, we're going to have a unordered list with a little bit of padding. And within that ordered list, we want to map over this list of transactions. And for each transaction in that list, we're going to render that on screen, essentially. Pretty straightforward. Oh, actually, sorry. Let's open up another pair of curly brackets, and we're going to use this .map method to iterate over this array of transaction signatures, or sorry, transaction objects. And within, let's see if I'm doing this right. So list of transactions. Yep. All right, yep, makes sense to me. We're going to map over each item. Oh, I think I provided, what am I doing wrong here? I feel like I'm missing something. Sorry, I feel like I'm missing something. What am I missing? I'm gonna go ahead and erase this. So we have the form header, that's our div. And then under that, we're going to create a new div with this CSS information. But in order to render this div, we are going to get that list of transactions, length, make sure it's greater than 0. And then we're going to render this information. And then within that div, we're going to declare an unordered list, class name P2. Okay, give it some padding. We're going to open up another set of curly brackets. Let's see. All right. And then, yep. Okay, sorry I had a brain fart. I was just a little bit confused. We're gonna get the signature of the transaction. So we're using string interpolation to extract the signature from each transaction object. And then we're going to open up a set of parentheses to implicitly return this list item React element. And because we are programmatically rendering these React UI elements, we have to provide a key value, and the key value can just be the signature. Sometimes people provide the index as a key value. It's actually bad practice to do that. It's better practice to provide a more, I guess, unique, you can call it unique, key value. And we're going to use string interpolation inside this class name property. So go ahead and open up a set of curly brackets and then backticks. Then we're going to provide some generic CSS information that'll be applied to every single list item element. But we're going to say if the index of this item does not equal 0, as in if it's not the first item in the array, then we're going to give it some vertical spacing. We've done that quite a few times throughout this course, so that pattern should be familiar to you by this point. And then we're going to provide 2 items a P elements and a button. And this button is essentially going to be the signature, and we're just going to insert a icon just to give it, just to make the UI a little bit more presentable. I'm using Hero Icons. It's my favorite open source icon library. I think it's also made by the people who made Tailwind CSS, so it's really, those people just do such quality work. Gotta love them. Okay, awesome. I'm gonna give this button some styling information. Transition is a really great property. It allows us to basically smoothly transition your CSS information between state changes. So when I have this hover condition, and I say when it's hovered, I want the text to change from this color to white, right, to this color. And this transition duration, that allows us to smoothly transition the colors. It just creates for a much cleaner, smoother, delightful user experience, in my opinion. And so, yeah, always love using those. I've used those throughout this course. If you're new to front-end development, I recommend maybe you just kind of study the way I use my CSS. So maybe if you can take some tips and tricks in the projects you build for yourself. Okay, so I went ahead and created the main UI component. So if we go back to our code, we have this essentially. It might not look exactly perfect because maybe I didn't get the CSS exactly right, but moving forward, I think it does the job. And we can go ahead and create the second UI component. It's definitely the more complex one. And if this course is, one of the first times you're building out React functional components, then you might learn something new here. So let's go ahead and pay attention. Well, first we notice here that this UI component takes a few arguments, but because we're using TypeScript, we have to declare the types of each argument. And so we do that by using this type keyword. So let's just go ahead and do that. Type transaction details props. And it's kind of standard practice to, when you're creating a type object for a function's properties, to just name it the name of the function and then append props, that props word at the end of it. So transaction details props, and we're going to give it the property of transaction details. So again, any keyword is not best practice. I'm doing it so that way we don't waste too much time on TypeScript stuff, because it's not the core of this lesson. But I do challenge you to kind of take the time on your own, maybe even pause this video and give it more specific type information. Okay, let's go ahead and create our functional component called transaction details. So again, this component is going to be that kind of pop-up modal that we got whenever I clicked on a specific transaction, which then is going to display, aptly named, the details of the transaction that we click on. And so we're going to specify what kind of properties it takes. Okay, and then let's go ahead and return some React fragments for now. Okay, and so now that we have this functional UI component, let's go ahead and pause, go back up here, and pass in this information. and we're passing in our transaction details. We are passing in our display details, and that sets display details function. So in the same way that you declare a function that takes some arguments and then call that function later in your code and pass in those arguments, we're kind of doing the same exact thing, but with UI components, right? With the components we actually render on screen. So it's kind of the same idea. I hope that makes sense to you. Okay, fantastic. So let's go ahead and code our transaction details UI component. So first, what we're gonna do is we're gonna use this dialog and transition items from the Headless UI library to kind of facilitate with that really clean, smooth transition that we got when we used our UI before. Actually, let me just go ahead and demo that one more time for reference. All right, so when I would click on any one transaction, we just get this very smooth kind of, but quick, like back and forth, right? The modal comes on and then it just fades back when I exit out of it, essentially. So yeah, we're gonna use this transition root show, passing that display details, and then open those tags. And then within that, we're gonna use dialog, class name, relative z10, and then this is important. We have to pass in the set display details function to this onClose property, because this is the function that's responsible for determining whether this UI component is displayed or not, right? Whether it's opened or closed. So please make sure you do that. And then we're going to specify the child. Oops, I did that wrong. And then we're going to add all of this information. So this is a React fragment. This is the enter information. And essentially, if you want to kind of edit the speed of how this UI element enters, or the opacity, or just kind of like the visual details of how this element enters and exits from view, you would essentially pay attention to these lines of code. Okay. Okay, fantastic. And let me go ahead and fix that. Open that up. And I'm going to provide a div. But we're not going to open up those tags. It's going to be an inline div. And we're going to provide some CSS information. This is essentially the kind of backdrop of the UI when this UI element is rendered on screen. So you can actually leave a comment if you want. So if you notice, when we display our modal, the kind of backdrop of the UI dims, it gets a little bit blurry, right? So to bring the user's attention to that modal on screen, this little line of code, this little inline div, is essentially responsible for making the background a little bit dimmed. We use this, we give it the background black and we give it some opacity, so it's a little bit see-through. And then we use this backdrop blur property to give it some like kind of blurriness, that kind of like frosted glass look. So it's a small touch, but it really brings your UI to the next level. I really do think so. Okay, awesome. Now that we got that, let's go ahead and focus on building out the kind of main components of our UI. So we're going to create a new div and give it some CSS information. This CSS is essentially responsible for kind of dictating the UI element's position on screen. And then the div item within it is going to be a flex box item. We're going to say justify center so that everything is kind of censored. It's going to be only as tall as the content within it. And then we're going to give it some padding, essentially. Okay. Now we're going to use another transition child. Open up those tags and give this some rendering information as well. You can go ahead and just copy this because I know it is a little bit tedious and you probably just want to get to coding the rest of the UI. And it's essentially the same exact thing that we coded earlier. So it's really no different. It just applies to this kind of inner HTML information that we're going to give right now. So we're going to open up a div. And then we're going to open up another div. And let's actually go ahead and add a comment. Oops. Open up some curly brackets. Oh my gosh, my typing is horrible today. And we're just going to say that this is the header. And we're saying horizontal margin is auto. So this kind of stays in the center. Justify center, we want this to be center screen, or at least center within the div it's in parent components. We're gonna use rounded full, which effectively makes it a circle. We're gonna give it this custom color. We're gonna give it some border information in this custom border color. And within that div, we're going to insert an icon. Cube, transparent. We're going to give it some custom styling. And finally, we're just going to use this area hidden tag and set that to true. Fantastic. So that is kind of the header. And now to code the rest of this component. We're going to use this dialog title. And feel free to give it whatever title you want. But we're going to render this as an H3 component, and we're going to give it this styling information. Okay, fantastic. And once we've done that, we're going to open up another div right under it. And we're going to again open up a pair of curly brackets because what we want to do is we want to iterate over this transaction details object, right? So it's an object with a bunch of key value pairs, and we want to loop over each key value pair. And for each key value pair, we want to render the key and the value. But in order to do that, we have to use this object entries method, pass in the object we want to loop over. And then once we do that, then we can use that map method that we're very familiar with. And we're gonna kind of extrapolate the key and the value pair. And then we're going to get the index. And then we can use our arrow function and open up a pair of parentheses, just like that. But hold on, we're not done, because we have this other confusing line of logic that needs some explaining. So essentially, we're going to open up a pair of parentheses, and within this parentheses, we're going to just add a bunch of conditional values that essentially equate to a true or false in order to conditionally render this inner UI element, right? So what are we saying? Let me go ahead and format this in a cleaner way. We're saying if the value is equal to null, and if the type of this value does not equal object, or if this value is not an array, right? Then we're going to go ahead and render that UI elements, right? So first of all, this value has to exist. We're not going to render, an object. It has to be just like either a simple string of text or a simple number, and it's not going to be an array. And the reason why I add these conditions is because in the response object, some of the transactions, they contain, object as values or arrays as values. And if you want to challenge yourself and edit this code in a way that allows you to display and render, those object values or those array values in a way that's aesthetically pleasing and looks good on the UI, I actually highly recommend you do that. I think that'd be a great practice. But for demonstration purposes, we're not going to do that. We're going to filter those out using that code, and then we're going to go ahead and move forward with displaying those values. So we're going to say, I'm going to render a p element, and we're going to pass it in that index as key. Now, again, I don't recommend that. It's not best practice. I do that because it's kind of quick and dirty. But it's not best practice. I think actually passing in the value as a key could be an option, but this value has the potential to be of type unknown, which is invalid. I think if you provide not this bang operator, yeah, that won't work. So again, another challenge, if you want to find a way to work around not passing in the index of the item we're looping over, I recommend you do that. But let's go ahead and move forward with declaring this div. We're going to pass in that group item that essentially allows us to edit the CSS of the child elements of this p tag. And we're going to give it some custom background and border coloring. And some spacing values, just like that. Then within that div, we're going to declare another div, open that up, make that a flex property justified between an item center, so that the p elements and the div elements that we've kind of put next to each other, they're spread apart horizontally on opposite ends. But they're kind of in line with each other, so vertically centered. Okay. And so let's go ahead. We're going to add a key. We're going to programmatically insert that key value. And we're just going to give it that font bold to make it stand out. And then this div is going to be a flexbox item. And this is going to contain our values. So again, we are saying, I'm going to open up a pair of curly brackets, and we are saying, if this value does not equal null, then we are going to determine the data type of this value. So if it's of string, or If it's of number, then we can render this value, convert it to a string, and if its length as a string is greater than 10, then we're going to essentially kind of truncate that. And so we're going to use string interpolation to do that. Again, we're going to convert it to a string. And then we're going to use this slice method to convert it to, just kind of 10 values. Oops. Otherwise, we're just going to return the value, right? And then otherwise, we're just going to say not available and not available, just like that. Okay, awesome. And so just like that, we pretty much created that separate UI element. Oh, hold on. Nope, I forgot this one last thing. So on this dialog panel, above, let me see, where is it? Let me find where it is. So we have this div, this div, this div, and then we're going to create a new div. Give it some vertical spacing. And give that some styling. This CSS just essentially makes sure that the text property of this button stays in the center. The button's a little bit rounded. We're going to give it some border information. Give it some vertical spacing, horizontal spacing. And then give it some conditional CSS on the hover state. We're going to use that transition utility and give it a duration of, you can really give it a duration if you want, but I think 200 is a good value. Okay. And so just like that, for real this time, we should have a working version of the UI. Let's go ahead to our starter file and let's test this out. Uh-oh, what did I do wrong? Okay, so let's investigate that. So transaction details. Okay. So I did not use this in my, yes, I see, all transaction details. And so in my list of transactions, I need to, yes, okay. My bad. I need to call this function. Totally forgot about that. And pass. Okay. So now that we've hooked up this function to each button that we render, so this is the button. Awesome. So it kind of works. I think I kind of messed up the CSS. I probably have a bunch of typos, but as you can see, it's kind of embarrassing. Yeah, I imagine that I probably messed up the CSS a lot with some typos as I tried to type out that information. But it does work-ish. I hope you did a better job than I did. So, if yours isn't working as expected to, don't get too frustrated with yourself. Maybe just kind of replace the CSS by copy and pasting. I know that CSS is very meticulous, and if you mess up one little thing, it can actually have a pretty big effect on the way your UI renders on screen. So I recommend, just paying attention to that. I'm gonna go ahead and remove this if-else statement as well, see if that changes anything. Just go ahead and remove that. Yeah, so my code's kind of going whack, but again, I hope you did a little bit of a better job than I did. Please reference the finished code. It should be working fine for you. And with that being said, I'm just gonna go ahead and move forward with refactoring this project, because that is something that I really wanted to get to, and I don't want to waste too much of your time. So what I want you to do is, within the viewer file, go ahead and create a folder called components. And within that components folder, I want you to basically just copy and paste this transaction details name, paste that, and type in TSX. So just like that. Now what we're gonna do is we're actually just gonna go ahead and copy this transaction details function, paste it in there, paste in that type information as well above it, and just review all of these kind of red flags that you see popping up. And if it's dependencies that we're missing, we're just gonna go ahead and up into this code file, remove the dependencies we don't need, and import the dependencies we do need. Looks like we need React as well. And let's see, we have that icon. Actually, let's go ahead and import that whole thing. Okay, awesome. And so just like that, we don't have any more red errors. And let's go ahead and export this functional component, doing export default transaction details. And in order to get rid of this error, we're going to import that transaction details function, just like so. And so just like that, we've refactored our code. So it's, pretty simple. Not a huge refactoring job. Sometimes refactoring is actually kind of a complicated thing. We could further refactor our code even more. Like I'm gonna challenge you to refactor this UI elements that you loop over, as well as this UI elements that you loop over. And you could really do that actually within this file, so you don't have to create a whole other file like I did. You could just do that kind of below, like down here. In fact, yeah, you could just do that below down here. Refactor this UI component, and then you would just kind of like, in the same way that we insert this UI component into our starter function, like so, you would insert this refactored UI component. Let's say you name it like list item. You would just do list item, and then you'd pass in the appropriate properties to populate each list item with the elements you want, right? So in that case, it would be signature and index essentially. And so I challenge you to do that, to get into the practice of refactoring your code. As you do this, hopefully, as you fix your code and optimize it, making it cleaner, making it more refactored and just more professional, go ahead and post that on X and tag me. You should have my X information, and tag Helius. I'd love to just see you get your hands dirty with React and with Solana frontend development. I think that would be awesome. I'd love to repost and share your progress and your accomplishments. Thanks for watching this video. Please feel free to get connected with me on X, to connect with the Helius team on Discord, or to learn more about Helius on our website. I hope to see you in the next video. Peace out.